Hello guys, welcome back to my audiobook channel. Today, obviously by the title, we're reading The Witches by Roald Dahl, and the illustrations are by Quentin Blake, and we are on chapter 2, which starts on page 12, and I opened right up to it. I don't even have a bookmark. Currently in Boston, as you can tell. Well, obviously I could be wearing this sweatshirt anywhere, but anyway, we are on chapter 2 called My Grandmother, and it starts on page 12 again. And I don't want to be super loud because there's, other people. I'm currently, in this, closet, so this would be perfect if I had Harry Potter. Alright. I myself had 2 separate encounters with witches before I was 8 years old. From the first I escaped unharmed, but on the second occasion I was not so lucky. Things happened to me that will probably make you scream when you read about them. That can't be helped. The truth must be told. The fact that I am still here and able to speak to you, however peculiar I may look, is due entirely to my wonderful grandmother. My grandmother was Norwegian. The Norwegians know all about witches. For Norway, my grandmother was Norwegian. The Norwegians know all about the witches, for Norway, with its black forests and icy mountains, is where the first witches came from. My father and my mother were also Norwegian, but because my father had a business in England, I had been born there and had lived there and had started going to an English school twice a year at Christmas and in the summer. Twice a year, at Christmas and in the summer, we went back to Norway to visit my grandmother. This old lady, as far as I could gather, was just about the only surviving relative we had on either side of our family. She was my mother's mother, and I absolutely adored her. When she and I were together, we spoke either Norwegian or in English. It didn't matter which. We were equally fluent in both languages, and I have to admit that I felt closer to her than to my mother. Soon after my 7th birthday, my parents took me, as usual, to spend Christmas with my grandmother in Norway, and it was over there, while my father and mother and I were driving in icy weather just north of Oslo, that our car skidded off the road and went tumbling down into a rocky ravine. My parents were killed. I was firmly strapped in the back seat and received only a cut on the forehead. I won't go into the horrors of the terrible afternoon. I still got shivers when I think about it. I finished up, of course, back in my grandmother's house with her arms around me tight, and both of us crying the whole night long. That took a turn. Here's the picture. Maybe I can tap on it. That was quite the turn. Oh. This is really interesting lighting. Oh, there we go. What are we going to do now? I asked her through tears. You will stay here with me. Okay. I'm trying to think of what voice to give her. You will stay here with me, she said. I don't know Norwegian accents. Sorry, I'm gonna repeat this line so many times. You will stay here with me, she said, and I will look after you. Aren't I going back to England? No, she said. I could never do that. Heaven shall take my soul, but Norway shall keep my bones. The very next day, in order that we might both try to forget our great sadness, my grandmother started telling me stories. She was a wonderful storyteller, and I was enthralled by everything she told me. But I didn't become really excited until she got to the subject of witches. She was apparently a great expert on these creatures, and she made it very clear to me that her witch stories, unlike most of the others, were not imaginary tales. They were all true. They were the gospel truth. They were history. Everything she was telling me about the witches had actually happened, and I had better believe it. What was worse, what was far, far worse than the witches, far worse, was that the witches were still with us. They were all around us, and I had better believe that too. Are you really being truthful, Grandma? Really and truly truthful? My darling, she said, You won't last long in this world if you don't know how to spot a witch when you see one. But you told me that witches look like ordinary women, Grandmama. Oh, Grandmama. Grandmama? Yeah, Grandmama. So how can I spot them? You must listen to me, my grandmother said. You must remember everything I tell you. After that, all you can do is cross your heart and pray to heaven and hope for the best. We were in the big living room of a house in Oslo, and I was ready for bed. The curtains were never drawn in that house, and through the windows I could see huge snowflakes falling slowly to the outside world that was as black as tar. My grandmother was tremendously old and wrinkled, with a massive white body which was smothered in grey lace. She sat there, majestic in her armchair, filling every inch of it. Not even a mouse could have squeezed in to sit beside her. I myself, just 7 years old, was crouched on the floor at her feet, wearing pajamas, dressing gown, and slippers. Look at how they spell pajamas. It's with a Y. I don't know. You swear you won't pulling my leg, I kept saying to her. You swear you won't, just pretending. Listen, she said. I have known no less than 5 children who have simply vanished off the face of this earth, never to be seen again. The witches took them. I still think you're just trying to frighten me, I said. I am trying to make sure you don't go the same way, she said. I love you and I want you to stay with me. Tell me about the children who disappeared, I said. My grandmother was the only grandmother I ever met who smoked cigars. She lit one now. A long black cigar that smelled of burning rubber. The first child I knew who disappeared, she said, was called Ringhild Hansen. Ringhild was about 8 at the time, and she was playing with her little sister on the lawn. Their mother, who was baking bread in the kitchen, came outside for a breath of air. Where's Ringhild? She asked. She went away with the tall lady, the little sister said. What tall lady? The mother said. The tall lady in the white gloves, the little sister said. She took Ringhild by the hand and led her away. No one, my grandmother said, ever saw Ringhild again. Oh, this is creepy. Didn't they search for her, I asked. They searched for miles around. Everyone in the town helped, but they never found her. What happened to the other 4 children, I asked. They vanished just as Ringhild did. How, Grandmama? How did they vanish? In every case, a strange lady was seen outside the house just before it happened. But how did they vanish? I asked. The second one was very peculiar, my grandmother said. There was a family called Christensen, and they lived up on Holm and Colin, and they had an old oil painting in the living room, which they were very proud of. The painting showed some ducks in a yard outside a farmhouse. There were no people in the painting, just a flock of ducks on the grassy farmyard and a farmhouse in the background. It's a picture of her telling. And here's the painting. It was a large painting and rather pretty. Well, one day the daughter Solveig came home from school eating an apple. She said a nice lady had given it to her on the street. The next morning, little Solveig was not in her bed. The parents searched everywhere, but they couldn't find her. Then all of a sudden her father shouted, "There she is! That's Solveig feeding the ducks." He was pointing at the old oil painting, and sure enough, Solveig was in it. She was standing in the farmyard in the act of throwing bread to the ducks out of the basket. The father rushed up to the painting and touched her, but that didn't help. She was simply a part of the painting, just a picture painted on the canvas. What is this? Did you ever see the painting, Grandmama, with the little girl in it? Many times, my grandmother said, and the peculiar thing was that little Solveig kept changing her position in the picture. One day she would actually be inside the farmhouse and you could see her face looking out the window. Another day she would be far over to the left with a duck in her arms. Did you see her moving in the picture, Grandmama? Nobody did, wherever she was, whether outside feeding the ducks or inside looking out the window. She was always motionless, just a figure painted in oils. It was all very odd, my grandmother said, very odd indeed. And what was most odd of all was that as the years went by, she kept growing older and older in the picture. In 10 years, the small girl had become a young woman. In 30 years, she was middle-aged. Then all at once, 54 years after it all happened, she disappeared from the picture altogether. You mean she died? I said. Who knows, my grandma said. Some very mysterious things go on in the world of witches. That's 2 you've told me about, I said. What happened to the third one? The third one was little Bridget Svensson, my grandmother said. She lived just... Why is it always girls? So far all the victims have been girls. She lived just across from the road from us. One day she started growing feathers all over her body. Within a month she had turned into a large white chicken. Her parents kept her for years in a pen in the garden. She even laid eggs. What color eggs? I said. Brown ones, my grandmother said. Biggest eggs I've ever seen in my life. Her grandmother made omelets out of them. Delicious they were. I gazed up at my grandmother, who sat there like some ancient queen on her throne. Her eyes were misty gray, and they seemed to be looking at something many miles away. The cigar was the only real thing about her at the moment. The smoke it billowed around her head in blue clouds. But the little girl who became a chicken didn't disappear, I said. Not Birch did. She lived on for many years, laying her brown eggs. You said all of them disappeared. I made a mistake, my grandmother said. I'm getting old. I can't remember everything. What happened to the fourth child? I asked. The fourth one was a boy called Harold. Oh, there, we have a boy finally. My grandmother said, one morning his skin went all grayish yellow. Then it became hard and crackly, like the shell of a nut. By evening the boy had turned to stone. Stone, I said. You mean real stone? Granite, she said. I'll take you to see him if you like. They still keep him in the house. He stands in the hall, little stone statue. Visitors lean their umbrellas up against him. Although I was very young, I was not prepared to believe everything my grandmother told me, and yet she spoke with such conviction, with such utter seriousness, and with never a smile on her face or a twinkle in her eye, that I found myself beginning to wonder. Go on, Grandmama, I said. You told me there were 5 altogether. What happened to the last one? Would you like a puff of my cigar? She said. I'm only 7, Grandmama. I don't care what age you are, she said. You'll never catch a cold if you smoke cigars. What about number 5, Grandmama? Here's a picture of the girl turning into a hen and the boy turning into statue to hold stuff. Number 5, she said, chewing on the end of her cigar as though it was a delicious asparagus. Asparagus is gross. Was rather an interesting case. A 9-year-old boy called Leaf was summer holidaying with his family on the fjord. The whole family was picnicking and swimming on some rocks on one of the little islands. Young Leaf dived into the water, and his father, who was watching him, noticed that he stayed under for an unusually long time. When he came to the surface at last, he wasn't Leaf anymore. What was he, Grandmama? He was a porpoise, which is just like a dolphin. He wasn't. He couldn't have been. He was a lovely young porpoise, she said, as friendly as could be. Grandmama, I said. Yes, my darling. Did he really and truly turn into a porpoise? Absolutely, she said. I knew his mother well. She told me all about it. She told me about how Leaf the porpoise stayed with them all that afternoon, giving his brothers and sister rides on his back. They had a wonderful time. Then he waved a flipper at them and swam away, never to be seen again. What is happening with this story? But Grandmama, I said, how did they know that the porpoise was actually Leaf? He talked to them, my grandma said. He laughed and joked with them all the time he was giving them rides. But wasn't there a most tremendous fuss when this happened? I asked. Not much, my grandmother said. You must remember that here in Norway we are used to that sort of thing. There are witches everywhere. There's probably one living on our street this very moment. It's time you went to bed. Oh, after all that, a witch wouldn't come in through my window in the night, would she? I asked, quaking a little. No, my grandmother said. A witch would never do silly things like climbing up drain pipes or breaking into people's houses. You'll be quite safe in your bed. Come along, I'll tuck you in. Alright, that is the end. It was only 10 pages, but it took us like 20 minutes, so like... Anyway, we ended on page 23, so we'll be picking up on page 24 with chapter 3. So thank you for joining me, and I will see you guys for the next chapter or book or whatever you're listening to at the time. So I'll see you guys later. Bye, and thanks again for watching.